Recently, NARUC President Paul Kjellander sat down for a talk with Phil Moeller, Executive Vice President of Business Operations Group and Regulatory Affairs for EEI. They had a great conversation, ranging from topics such as lessons learned from the overwhelming challenges of 2020, new EEI initiatives, including broadband and clean energy, and also EEI's ongoing efforts with diversity and inclusion. Finally, President Kjellander shared what he's learned so far since becoming NARUC president. Let's watch.
Hello, my name is Paul Kjellander, and I'm the current president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. And today I get a chance to talk to Phil Moeller, who's the executive vice president of all things regulatory at Edison Electric Institute. Phil, of course, had an illustrious career around the energy sector. And I first got an opportunity to meet him when he was with FERC as a commissioner there. And now I get a chance to work more closely with him as we move forward with another year of regulatory excitement in the regulatory field. So it's great to be able to visit with you today, Phil. As you know, our theme for this year, and actually it's a multi-year theme, is called Connecting the Dots, Innovative Disruptive Technologies and Regulation. And as we're trying to connect all those dots, it just seems like every time you see one, there's 10 more out there, and we're constantly trying to make them all sort of fit together. And it seems like it's even more difficult with even more options and opportunities for the virtual meeting, for more dots to emerge that you didn't even know existed. So as you look at 2020, which was a very disruptive year in and of itself, how hard has it been for you with EEI and your efforts to try to stay focused and make those right connections?
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to my fellow Pacific Northwesterner, hailing from the state of Washington, I do. And I appreciate the chance to talk about these issues. 2020 was quite the year, as you mentioned, and I think it proved a few things. I think, for one thing, we had quite the challenge. But as an industry, we hunkered down, figured out how to communicate virtually, and had to deal with a lot of natural disruptions as well, a derecho, hurricanes, wildfires. All the while, I have to be quite clear, I'm proud of the industry for how it responded and how it kept regulators informed. You have to work really hard at doing that, but as a collective industry, if we count our regulatory folks, if we count our customers, the economy as a whole, we really pulled together quite well to deal with an unprecedented, at least in modern times, set of challenges that were on us. So I think that the key for, even though it was a difficult year, what kept us together was open channels of communication. And of course, that'll flow into some other issues we'll talk about, the need to have that opportunity to communicate well.
So was it a simple transition to all the virtual meetings? How difficult was it to stay relevant?
I think what helped, certainly with us, and I think with our member companies and probably throughout the economy, is that almost everybody had to do it. I recall a time, even when I was at FERC, when there was some telework, but it was not that many people did it, and the people who weren't doing it weren't sure how it worked with everybody else. But now that everybody had to do it, people, I think, responded quite quickly. There were some rough starts at first as people got used to the technology and things to do, and obviously the phrase of the year was "you're on mute," but that's better than potentially not being on mute and wishing you had been. So in that sense, I think the fact that everybody kind of pulled together on that, again, throughout EEI and throughout the industry and throughout society, and that's what made it at least manageable as we've moved through the year, with hopefully the end in sight relatively soon.
Yeah, I hope so as well. You know, with so many options and opportunities out there and so many voices, how do you know that you're hearing from the right ones? How do you pick and choose through that?
Well, it's actually, can you repeat that one again, Paul?
Well, there's so many voices out there, so many opportunities for there to be multiple sources. How do you pick and choose the right ones as you move forward, and instead of just the popular ones? How do you make sure that you have the right voices at the table?
I think you have to really actively work to get them to the table. And for example, we had a call, or you had a call, the NARUC committees on electricity and the ERE committee as well, where we talked about recently the concept of using energy efficiency as a carbon reduction resource, and the fact that we have to take that set of issues to a more complex and more targeted area as the economy electrifies, and yet we also want to be as efficient as possible. And one of the people on that call was with the TJX Corporation. So they have 3,000 retail outlets throughout the United States. That brings up all kinds of interesting issues in terms of different jurisdictions they're in, maybe different rate structures. But that was an example of reaching out to someone that perhaps you're not used to hearing from. Similarly, there could be small business representatives. Obviously, we want to hear from our residential customers as well, but particularly in the time of virtual meetings, it's I think incumbent on us to be proactive in reaching out to new voices so that we do get a sense for what our customers want and a sense for how to deliver it to them.
So when we look in terms of consumers and customers, what is being done differently to try to help ensure that utilities are engaged with the communities they serve, especially now when it's more difficult to go door to door? We've seen a lot happen over the last year, including the moratorium on shutoffs. So obviously, a lot of things impacting consumers. What's being done, or what can be done to try to more thoroughly communicate with them, especially at a time in which you have stay-at-home orders and face-to-face interaction is far more difficult?
Our companies have been pretty aggressive in outreach, whether it's over the airwaves or over the cables, and also in terms of communication as part of normal billing procedures. But I think, as you mentioned, it was our industry, along with our regulators, jumped in right away to look at moratoriums or have a moratorium on a variety of shutoffs. And in some jurisdictions, those continue, and some it made sense for those to roll off. But I think there was a lot of misunderstanding, perhaps by well-intentioned policymakers, that once the moratorium is lifted, that suddenly people are going to be shut off. And what reality is that just starts a process where the companies can then reach out to the customers and develop a payment plan or provide them with access to resources that they might not otherwise have known about to help with their bills. So again, that falls into the communication category where there's been a lot of work to make sure that we can keep our customers whole, and that they can, if they've had accrued debts, can deal with them, because we don't want the rest of society carrying too much of a load when there are resources available for those who need them. And again, getting the word out is key to that.
Do you think there's more that state regulators could be doing as we look at some of these connections that need to be made with consumers and utilities?
Well, I think just staying on it to make sure that there is plenty of communication going on, that that when companies can approach the regulators and give them regular updates as to the status of this issue, that those doors are open. But for the most part, I think that they are, our friends in the neighborhood community have been on this. They're paying attention, close attention, and we appreciate it, because it's not over yet. We're going to be keep going for a while.
Well, why don't we move to another topic that I never thought I would be asking someone who's involved in the electricity sector about it, and that's broadband. Usually it's reserved for all my friends in the telecom industry. But now we get to talk to you and about broadband, because EEI has an initiative that's working on the middle mile broadband initiative. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Well, it's almost a cliche now, but everyone has recognized with the pandemic how important access is, and particularly those underserved areas that need it now more than ever, but they certainly still need it. So the concept behind middle mile broadband, and I know you're aware of this because you've been a champion of it, is that if a company is putting in, say, fiber optic communication services, say along their transmission system or maybe even the distribution system, that the incremental cost of adding additional capacity is really quite small. And yet that added capacity can make the difference in terms of allowing broadband access ultimately to customers who don't have it. And the middle mile concept is one where, again, our companies would put in extra fiber at a relatively small incremental cost, and then other providers would provide the last mile, the actual service involved. And we appreciate your leadership on it, former President Presley's leadership in raising this issue. There are several states that we've highlighted in terms of them being proactive and trying to get this concept pushed out. So it's a combination of, at the state level, not only regulatory policy and approval of such investments, sometimes it's going to take legislative actions to clarify, say, the property issues related to easements. There is probably a role for Congress and the FCC, and we are working with Representative Clyburn and Congress and others who are championing this. It's a big priority, and we're keeping the FCC informed as well. So it's a multi-layered approach, but ultimately it's going to most likely fall most significantly to NARUC members to facilitate this, also in conjunction with their state legislatures, to move these policies forward in a way that actually can lead to significant more deployment in underserved areas that obviously need it.
So you mentioned that state regulators are going to be playing a role with this. Where do you really see PUCs fitting in at it? Is it going to simply be in the hearing room as the cases come for recovery of some of these costs associated with middle mile broadband, or is it something more?
I think it's something more. It's going to be regulatory approvals after, of course, the filings have been considered and appropriately so. And so there'll be some element of rate recovery involved. But I think even more significantly, state regulators can be a voice for this to try and get the word out, and they can be facilitators to the other public policy makers, such as, again, their state legislatures, to explain what's involved here, because it may not be intuitive to a lot of people, and it might raise some questions as to, are the energy companies trying to be the new providers of this? And of course, clarifying that, making sure people know what's in this type of proposal, the different players involved who will actually also have to be part of the solution. That can be a role that state regulators play, and a very productive one.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll be looking for that then at a hearing room near us, and kind of excited to see how that plays out. So good luck with that effort.
Thank you, and thank you for supporting it and conceptually.
You bet. Well, let's shift now to clean energy. That's the talk of the town as everybody looks at deep decarbonization and electrification. Clean energy is going to play a huge role in that. So you have a hashtag campaign that I've become aware of. It's called hashtag committed to clean. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and what EEI's vision is for clean energy?
Absolutely. Our commitment is to get as clean and as green as we can, as quickly as we can, keeping in mind, of course, reliability and affordability at the same time. And it is quite remarkable, given how things have changed so quickly. You've probably heard me say these statistics before, but our EEI members have reduced their carbon footprint by 33% from 2005 levels. And as an industry, we've committed to basically 50% reduction by 2030 and 80% by 2050. There are some challenges in getting to 100%, but nevertheless, we're committed to moving forward, and it's a pretty exciting time. But there will be challenges, particularly in the sense of a lot of the green energy, as you well know, is produced in areas that doesn't have a lot of load or is far from major load. So the transmission system will be a big part of that set of policies that needs to be addressed to maximize the potential of what our nation has in this area.
So what role then do you see as far as maybe even a shift in responsibilities for state regulators in all this? What do they need to be gearing up for as utilities move further down the road towards cleaner energy?
Well, I know this happens in many regions already, but a focus on regional collaboration and discussion, particularly as there's more momentum growing for the big interregional lines that that have always been a tough issue to solve because, again, between regions, within regions, they have their own set of cost allocation and permitting and siting rules, and crossing into those other regions, again, has always been a big challenge, but there's enormous benefits or potential benefits to those lines occurring. And that's going to take an even greater amount of collaboration between state regulators because, first of all, figuring out what the need is, what the policies are, and then the tough part, of course, is always who pays for them in the cost allocation process. But having a greater understanding of the need up front will only help in those tough discussions later.
So Phil, as you look at the deployment of more clean energy, and obviously a lot of things are going to have to happen sooner than later if some of these targets and goals are going to be achieved, what are the game changers? Do you see any game changers out there that are really going to make a difference going forward? Single technology or technologies that are just going to push this thing on a track and move it even faster?
Well, in terms of generation technologies, I think a lot of that is yet to be seen. I think that regulators of all types have had a little bit of a challenge dealing with storage because storage, particularly battery storage, can be a lot of different things that it doesn't fit into the typical categories that we've dealt with for decades since it has that flexibility. And of course, regulators are, from my experience, always concerned about overcompensation. And yet it's an area that is expanding greatly and is going to be necessary for the transition. So grappling with those storage compensation set of issues is obviously going to be pretty important going forward, both state regulators and ongoing with FERC. I think in terms of technologies that can empower customers, we're probably on the verge of a major revolution there in a positive way. Although there are always threats. The more things we add to the grid, the Internet of Things, the attack surface widens for those who want to create harm. And arguably, if we want to really extrapolate energy efficiency while we electrify the economy, more responsive price signals from the regulatory community are going to be important because, as we've talked about for years, if the sun is going down in Southern California at 5 o'clock in January, we don't want everyone charging their vehicles at that time, which happens to be peak and is complicated by a major ramp up to meet the needs of people coming home. For example, when the sun is setting in a system that will have a lot of solar. So those kind of innovations in price signals and rate design, I think will be key in maximizing the potential of what we envision, which is, again, an economy that is much more electrified, particularly on the transportation side, but also in other aspects of the economy. It's pretty exciting, but it's a new way of thinking, and we have to make sure that we move quickly, but we think it through to avoid any consequences that were unintended and harmful to customers.
Okay. Well, as if last year wasn't enough with the COVID scenario, we also encountered a lot more concern and a lot of issues arose in relationship to social justice. And last December, NARUC, in an effort to try to respond to some of the concerns and issues, at least on the regulatory front, we had a webinar that actually had a pretty decent turnout on COVID, race, and utility regulation. And you were one of the sponsors with EEI, which we greatly appreciate. We know too that the EEI and the utilities that you represent are responding directly to social justice and the need for more inclusion and diversity. Can you kind of share a little bit about what the vision is there for EEI?
Yes, thanks for asking that, Paul. Yeah, that was quite a webinar. There were hundreds of people on there, as I recall, so very timely, and the turnout reflected the appropriateness of the theme and the timing. Our efforts on workforce diversity actually started, well, arguably long ago, but took up more intensity about 3 years ago when our current chairman of the time, Chris Crane of Exelon, made it a point that really wanted the industry to focus on making sure that our employees better reflected the customers we served. So that has been in the works for a while, but obviously this year has had some dramatic discussions and actions about a variety of social issues, and our current chair, Ben Folk, with Excel, also served Minneapolis, and the themes and the issues that came out of what happened there in May has made it a real priority that we focus on this set of issues, larger than workforce diversity, but also the larger set of equity issues, not only as an industry, but also at EEI. And so one of the things that we've done is brought in a loan executive from Entergy, who was in charge of these issues for a very large company. His name's Todd Manuel, and he's been loaned to EEI for the year to do two things: to focus the industry's efforts externally on this set of issues, but also to coach and guide us within EEI to make sure that we're maximizing our potential to be cognizant and active on this set of issues. So it's very timely, and we also appreciate NARUC's focus on it and involving some of our folks like Terry Oliva, who's been a leader in pushing these issues throughout our industry, but also working with NARUC at the same time and discussing them and coming up with thoughts and plans and actions to address the set of issues.
Well, thank you for addressing that, and we certainly do appreciate EEI's leadership on that front. And again, all the assistance that you provided NARUC in helping to move that topic forward. So again, thank you very much. And I really do want to thank you for taking time out to talk with me today. Before we finish up, any parting shots or closing thoughts?
Parting shots I'm not very good at, but I would like to ask you, now that you've been in the job a while, what's the biggest surprise that you've encountered as being the president of NARUC this year?
I think the biggest surprise is that the idea of cooperative federalism really is more than just a concept. It really is a driving force and factor that we need to be looking at more closely. And I guess you're not a NARUC president until you actually give a speech on cooperative federalism. And I had a chance to do that with you and your group earlier this month. But as we look at the new administration, I think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunities going forward that we shouldn't miss. And that I think collectively we need to be, when we have similar issues with advocacy, with EEI, with utilities and other sectors, that we need to figure out a way to get a common voice to move forward so that we're not just chatter.
Right.
And that we can actually be effective. So I think that's the one thing that I think I kind of awoke to, which is an understanding that those are more than just words. Mm-hmm. The things that we really need to move forward on. And that was probably the most enlightening thing that kind of hit me over the last few months, was just how significant and important that is, and how much work it takes to effectively move something forward that matters. And as you mentioned in this conversation today, there are so many important issues in front of us that we can't just let them sit. And we have to ensure we have the right advocacy message, and we need to ensure that we can be heard appropriately. And it's critical. So thanks for asking.
Well, I think it's very insightful because the issues have been there for a while. That particularly, I think, with the NARUC FERC connection, recognizing that that's going to be ever more important going forward. Let's just take transmission, for instance, to make sure that the goals that the FERC wants to push in expanding transmission, however those are implemented, have to have great involvement from state commissioners, or things aren't going to work, or they're not going to get built. So in that sense, I'm glad that you've recognized that and put the effort and the leadership into it. And I also want to commend you for the vision, along with your two successors, on having a game plan for 3 years out and connecting the dots. That was a great move, and that kind of continuity at a time of change, I think, will be very rewarding for NARUC, its members, and the entities that actually are regulated by NARUC members as well. So thanks for having that vision and putting it out in a way that really is quite thoughtful and has people thinking about how to answer that set of questions that was part of the document. So again, thank you.
Well, thank you. And as you mentioned, Judy Ogman and Michael Karen, who both will follow me in as presidents of the National Association, are great people to work with. They have a solid vision of where we need to go, and we certainly do look forward to working with EEI as we start to move down that road and actualize that theme. So thanks for all you do, and I wish you the best. Have a great 2021.
And same to you, Paul. Thanks for our discussion today. Always appreciate it.
Goodbye.